Earlier in the year, I reviewed this Ugreen NAS and I noted it provided considerably better performance per dollar than options from market leader Synology. I said that if you wanted something comparable in terms of value, you'd have to look at something like TerraMaster, although I'd personally never used one of those and couldn't speak to their quality. Well, TerraMaster decided this needed to be addressed, so they sent over their brand new F4-425 Plus. I will give you my opinion on this device and whether it's worth your time and money. Rather than spending too much time retreading old ground, let me just confirm that compared to Synology's offering, the TerraMaster F4-425 Plus is indeed giving you much better performance per dollar. Synology does have the most mature software stack, so it's up to you whether you feel it's worth paying their premium prices and dealing with their attempts to vendor lock everything in sight. Comparing this to the Synology DS925 Plus, you get a faster CPU, double the network bandwidth, and quadruple the RAM, all for less money. The real competition is with Ugreen, with the F4-425 Plus slotting in between the DXP 4800 and 4800 Plus in terms of spec and value. The CPU is a modest upgrade compared to the 4800, but not as performant as the 4800 Plus. Although with its more modern architecture, it should be more efficient, so we'll have to test its performance per watt. You get more RAM here than with either of the Ugreen models, although the 4800 Plus can be upgraded further. Networking is bang in the middle. Taking a look at the 425 Plus, it has an upgraded chassis compared to the standard TerraMaster Non-Plus. The standard version is plastic, but the Plus comes with a metal case that makes it feel a bit more upmarket. The two-tone silver aluminium and dark plastic makes it stand out in a market full of dark-coloured cubes. It'll be a matter of personal preference whether you like that or not. The front of the device shows off four 3.5-inch SATA drive bays. These use a toolless mechanism to secure 3.5-inch drives. For 2.5-inch drives, you'll need to use screws, which TerraMaster helpfully includes in the box. The toolless mechanism is a little fiddly, and I get nervous having my data held by little bits of plastic, but it seems to hold the drive pretty well once attached. You insert the drive, then clip these plastic things into the screw holes to secure it. Worst case, you could just use screws. One thing to note about these drive sleds is they are not lockable. A lot of devices like this will have locks in the drive bays to prevent someone ejecting them. This isn't really a security thing, as the locks are trivial to bypass. It's more to prevent idle hands from ejecting the drives while they're in use and wrecking your data. If you're buying one of these for home, keep it out of the reach of small children. Also in the front, we have a USB-A port rated for 10 gigabits per second, a power button and status LEDs. Around back we have another 3 USB ports, 2 USB-A and 1 USB-C, all 10 gigabit. There are 2 5 gigabit per second network interfaces and an HDMI port. The HDMI port isn't particularly useful unless you choose to install your own operating system, but we'll come to that later. The dual 5 gigabit network interfaces are a step up from the 2.5 gig that seems to be becoming the standard in this kind of NAS. Truth be told though, I would have preferred a single 10 gig interface over 2 5 gigs. I think there's an expectation that NASs need to have 2 network interfaces for redundancy, but I don't think it's necessary on this class of device. To actually achieve redundancy, you need it plugged into 2 different switches, and you need the rest of your devices similarly cabled into multiple switches. If you're building that level of redundancy into your network, I really have to question why you're doing it with consumer grade hardware that lacks redundancy basics like dual power supplies. 5 gig switches aren't all that common right now, so I would guess that most of the people running this device at 5 gig on launch will be doing it on a 10 gig switch anyway. For what it's worth, TerraMaster is raising the bar here by upping it to 5 gig, and the dual interface thing is more a market trend than a TerraMaster one. This device has not given up all its secrets yet. If we flip it over, we find 4 screws in the bottom. Firstly though, a moment of appreciation for those thick rubber feet. I know this is a weird thing to point out, but if you place this on a hard surface, they do make a difference by dampening the vibrations of mechanical hard drives and preventing your desk from acting like an amplifier. After removing the 4 screws in the bottom, the aluminium cover slides off to reveal the internals, including 3 M.2 NVMe drives. Only 2280 size drives are supported. That's most likely the type you're going to buy anyway, but if you have any smaller drives lying around from an old laptop or something, be aware there are no screw holes for them. Each of these can take up to an 8TB drive. Add that to the 4 slots at the front, which can each take up to 30 terabytes, and you have a theoretical maximum of 144 terabytes before raiding and formatting. Alongside the NVMe slots, you'll find the RAM. There's only a single RAM slot, so you can't add more, but you can replace the included 16 gig stick with a 32 gig one. In my Ugreen review, I said that while 8 was fine for a NAS doing NAS stuff, it would run out pretty quickly when using advanced functions like virtualization. I ended up buying another 8 to upgrade that NAS to 16 gig, so I appreciate TerraMaster including 16 as standard. There is also, rather curiously, a USB port tucked away in here. I believe this is a throwback, and TerraMaster used to put their operating system installer on a little USB drive here, but in this model the initial boot environment is on a chip attached directly to a motherboard header. Before I put this back together, I have an idea I'd like to share. You will note this device basically consists of a compute module screwed to the side of a disk chassis. If I undo a few more screws, it separates pretty easily, leaving me with a standalone computer and a disk chassis. The only thing this needs is some cooling, and it uses a standard 4-pin fan header. The chassis connects to a regular PCI Express slot, so in theory, you can use this standalone and connect this to another device. I'm not saying I'd buy it with that intention, but at some point you're going to replace it, and it's nice to know you can reuse the hardware for something else. 2 5GB network ports and a low-power x86 CPU, that could be your firewall in a few years. I think there's also an opportunity for TerraMaster here, because this will become obsolete, and at some point you'll upgrade to the latest shiny. The SATA 3 standard in this chassis is still going to be relevant as long as 3.5-inch hard drives exist. I think TerraMaster should consider selling standalone compute modules so that customers can upgrade their NAS to a later model without replacing the entire device. Cheaper upgrades for us, less waste for the environment, and TerraMaster gets to convert one-off purchases to recurring customers. Something to think about. Let's put this back together and do a little drag race. Both of these devices have the word plus in their name and use low-power mobile processors to reduce the impact on your electricity bill, but with their CPU choices, it looks like Ugreen favours more performance and TerraMaster favours more power efficiency. TerraMaster's is a newer CPU though, so let's see if that makes up any ground. I'm putting them back to stock hardware configurations, removing all of the drives, then booting each of them from a Linux USB and running sysbench while measuring power at the wall. I know this isn't what you're going to use your NAS for, but electricity here is expensive, and I'm wondering if an increased power draw is worth it for an increase in performance or vice versa. Looking at the single core numbers, Ugreen has a modest 8% performance lead for a not so modest 66% increase in power consumption. This isn't a fair test though, because the Ugreen unit has more cores to power, but we're asking it not to use them. The multi-core test is a better comparison. That shows Ugreen with a commanding 70% performance lead at the cost of more than double the power, a 126% increase over TerraMaster. When you crunch the numbers, this means the Ugreen Plus model provides 70% more raw CPU performance, but the TerraMaster Plus model provides 33% better performance per watt. These numbers are total power consumption with disks removed. Once you add 4 mechanical drives to NAS, their power consumption will become significant to the overall result. The Ugreen DXP 4800 Non-Plus has a CPU that's closer to TerraMaster's, essentially being an older and lower clocked version of it, but I haven't tested that here for 2 reasons. 1. The accompanying literature sent to me by TerraMaster seems to invite comparison with the 4800 Plus. 2. I haven't got a Non-Plus. My observation about noise was that the Ugreen one is quieter at idle, but once the benchmark was running and the fans ramped up, Ugreen's was considerably louder. Possibly because of its lower power draw, the TerraMaster fan didn't ramp up nearly as much. Leaving the hardware, it's time to look at the software. Actually, the first thing you might do is take a look at the manual, and I have a bone to pick here. The NAS didn't come with a physical manual, just a QR code that takes you to a website. To access the manual, you need to fill in a form, and your email address is a required field. Why? The manual wasn't particularly useful. If you need help getting started, I recommend going to TerraMaster's YouTube channel instead, where they have some useful install guides. Once your NAS is plugged in and powered on, there are multiple ways to connect. You can enter tnas.local into a web browser, or install one of the apps for Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, or Ubuntu. Yes, I said Ubuntu, not Linux. The package is supplied as a deb file specifically for Ubuntu, although it will likely work with other Debian-based distros. It installed fine on Debian 13 for me, but I didn't test it any further than that. There are no RPM packages or generic Linux binaries. But if your preference is Red Hat, SUSE, or Arch flavoured, you can use a web browser. That's what I'll be using in this video. Once you click start, you have 60 seconds before the operating system gets installed with default settings. You can customise those by hitting escape before the time runs out. The TOS 6 operating system will be installed on your data drives in its own partition. TOS is based on Ubuntu 22.04, although it has been customised by TerraMaster. Unlike certain NAS vendors, TerraMaster does not attempt to limit you to their own branded drives. There is a list of officially validated models, but you can use anything. The operating system is not contained on your NAS out of the box, just a little bootstrap program to install it. The actual operating system is downloaded from the internet at install time. If your NAS is not connected to the internet, you can download the package separately and upload it to your NAS for an offline install. Once it reboots, you're redirected to the license agreement, then it's time to name your device and create an account. If you allow TOS to install with default settings, you will have a storage pool and volume already created. I chose a custom install, so I'm going to get prompted to create them. This way I can show you the options. Creating our pool, we see some typical RAID options. JBOD plus RAIDs 0, 1, 5, 6 and 10, each representing a different trade-off between performance, resilience and capacity. These are industry standard terms you can look up, but TerraMaster gives you a nice visual representation of how your space will get used. One option that does require explanation is T-RAID. This is TerraMaster's own concoction. T-RAID attempts to juggle things around to give you the most usable space from your storage, while being able to tolerate a single drive failure, assuming you have more than one drive. You can't really have any resilience with a single drive. There is also T-RAID Plus, which sacrifices additional capacity to tolerate 2 drive failures. The nice thing about T-RAID is how it handles mismatched drives. With traditional RAID, you should really try to use identically sized drives, because it'll treat them all like they're the size of the smallest one. While you could build a RAID 5 array with 3 5TB drives and a 4th 2TB drive, this would be rather silly, because RAID 5 is going to have to match everything to the smallest 2TB drive, giving you less space than just using the 3 5TB drives on their own. However, if I do exactly this using T-RAID, it will add the whole 2TB to my array without any wastage. From a look under the covers, it seems to achieve this by partitioning the drives, RAIDing the partitions, then stitching the RAIDed partition arrays back into a single volume, chopping it up and putting it back together in different portions to maximize capacity. With my example here, it is cutting a 2TB partition across each of my 5TB drives. It then creates a RAID 5 array out of these partitions, 4 with 2TB each, giving 6TB of usable space. It then creates a second RAID 5 array out of the remaining space on my 5TB drives, this time 3 partitions with 3TB each, giving another 6TB of usable space. It stitches the two together to give a total of 12TB of usable space, with the ability to tolerate a single drive failure. I would recommend you purchase matching drives in the first place if you can, but if you're not buying a whole new set of drives to go with your brand new NAS, then T-RAID is a clever way to reuse a hodgepodge of existing hardware and get the most capacity out of it without sacrificing resilience. After defining the storage pool, I create a volume on which to place my drives. I'll not use up all my storage space just yet because I really want to talk about this hyperlock worm thing, but you can't enable it on your first volume. For a file system you can choose ButterFS or ext4. Some of the NAS features such as snapshots require ButterFS, so that's probably the one to pick. This has nothing to do with the RAID. ButterFS will be used for the file system, not to manage the underlying disks. The TerraMaster NAS supports most file sharing protocols. SMB is the main one, being used by Windows natively and supported by most other devices as well. NFS for the more Linux-centric among you. There's also rsync, WebDAV and FTP in both insecure and SFTP forms. The NAS also supports iSCSI for block level storage. The only notable omission I see is FTP-S. This is different too, but often confused with SFTP. SFTP is an extension of SSH and it is supported. FTP-S is FTP over SSL and doesn't seem to be here. You can also synchronize files between your NAS and other devices using the TerraSync app, so this is a good time to talk about the App Center. Most features require an app to be installed. When you first open it, the NAS will prompt to explain that it's sensible to only install the apps you intend to use in order to conserve resources. This is true. It's also good security practice. If it's not installed, it can't be attacked. I have to say my first reaction to this was, why are there so many backup apps? Backupper, centralized backup, Drupal backup vault, TFM backup, snapshot, cloud sync, TerraSync, USB copy. Why are there so many options for something as basic as a backup? It looks schizophrenic, but there is actually a plan. If you click on the backup icon on the main menu bar, it shows you the plan. These are all different components of what TerraMaster calls the Business Backup Suite. Each app handles a different scenario or device type. It's pretty comprehensive with support for physical devices, virtual devices, cloud services, other NASs, file syncing, snapshots. It supports hypervisor level backups of VMware ESX and Microsoft Hyper-V. This is quite an impressive spread for what I'd consider a prosumer device, with features that appeal to business scenarios and tie in well with support for LDAP and Active Directory-based single sign-on, as well as external monitoring via SNMP. It looks to me that TerraMaster is going after Synology's Active Backup suite with this one. Add Microsoft 365 backups in, and Synology might need to start worrying about their unofficial position as the cheapest way to back up everything in a small business. There is some work to be done in the branding though, like rename all of this stuff so it's business backup for servers, business backup for cloud, give them consistent icons, and make it obvious these are supposed to be components of a single solution rather than just a random collection of conflicting products. Moving on to the media side of things, the first-party multimedia apps from TerraMaster are meh. There's a Photos app and a media server. The Photos app is what you'd expect. The media server strings your content over DLNA, which is compatible with pretty much every media playback device with a network connection, but is not as fully featured as something like Plex or Jellyfin. That said, there is also a button to install Jellyfin natively, or Plex or MB. There are two ways you could look at this. One is that TerraMaster's media is falling behind the competition. The other is that unless you're going to commit enough development resource to your media app to make it better than fully available media servers like Jellyfin that are dedicated to this goal, there really isn't any point. You may as well just give people Jellyfin in the first place. My general impression of the TOS software is that it does a decent job of ticking the various boxes you'd expect a NAS like this to tick, but it's a bit rough around the edges. On the Jellyfin app, there was something off with the release information. As I was testing this, the current version of Jellyfin was 10.11.2. TerraMaster's App Center claimed to have 10.11.10, which doesn't exist. It actually installed 10.11.0, which until about a week ago was the current version, but the release date in TerraMaster said the 15th of April, when the most current version would have been 10.10.7. It looks like TerraMaster is updating these apps, which is good, but the provided metadata is not accurate. I encountered some issues with apps seeming to get stuck installing even though they had actually installed, and parts of the interface jumping up and down in a bit of a spasm. I also noticed a few spelling mistakes, and when I create a new folder it seems to have a habit of creating duplicates. None of these are deal breakers, but there are some niggles that made it feel a little bit like a work in progress at times. The default collection of apps is a bit limited. It supports Docker and virtualization though, so if you install those apps, there really is no limit to what you can run on this NAS. There's also this community section. Clicking it presents a disclaimer to say, hey, these aren't TerraMaster controlled apps, use at your own risk. I was expecting some kind of community site maintained by TerraMaster where people could share apps, but it's actually linking to a third-party website run by a solo developer going by the moniker OutcastM, who packages apps unofficially. I don't know if they've considered just employing him, but I asked and they said there's no official cooperation between them. I don't know how I feel about it. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments, please. In my line of work, this would not be allowed without due diligence, documentation, and contracts being signed. They've basically got a random third party with an app store built into their product. OutcastM is obviously a huge contributor to the community, it's just TerraMaster doesn't control this. I'm going to stop with the TOS features now and start looking at its security. You're putting your data on this device, so I think it's important to check for evidence that TerraMaster takes that responsibility seriously. I will start with the security advisor that's built into the operating system. If you let it install with default settings, this is one of the first things that's going to pop up, which I consider to be a good thing. Security should be one of the first things you concern yourself with. The recommendations though are a bit of a mixed bag. User password strength says my password is too weak, but the way it assesses it is outdated. TerraMaster's criteria is at least 8 characters with one uppercase, lowercase, numeric and symbol character. This focus on complexity is old-fashioned. Longer passwords or passphrases are more secure than complex passwords, and easier to remember. According to security.org, my supposedly weak password would take 9 quadrillion years to crack. However, I can construct an 8-character password that meets all of TerraMaster's recommendations and can be cracked in a matter of hours. File system snapshot not used. I don't know if I consider this security, more recovery, but you may need to recover from a security event, and as long as it wasn't the NAS that got hit, okay. HTTP or HTTPS port? No. This is security through obscurity, which is not real security. I made a video earlier this year about bad security advice you need to stop following, and this was on it. Changing default ports will not prevent bad guys from finding you. They can scan every port, or just use a search engine like Shodan. It is not inherently bad to change your port, it might even cut down on some noise, but people do this and put devices on the internet without the right precautions because they think changing their port will protect them. What TerraMaster should be saying here is tick this box to make sure your connection is encrypted, because by default it isn't. If a website has a password, it should be encrypted. Tick this box, that's your real security tip. Security isolation mode is an interesting one. I don't think it should be on this page, but I'm going to give TerraMaster credit for this feature. It's a kind of emergency lockdown mode that blocks access to and from the internet and only allows basic functions on the local network. You probably don't want this enabled all the time because it breaks many of the functions of your NAS. If you do want to lock things down on a more permanent basis, this could be done more elegantly with a firewall. I see this more as an "oh crap" button. You wake up in the morning and see a report that TerraMaster devices are being targeted by a zero-day attack. Oh crap, enable isolation mode. SPC restricts apps from accessing storage of the network. This could break stuff, and you'll have to tweak the settings a bit, but once you've got it dialed in, it's going to make it more difficult for ransomware to do damage. Good feature. Automatic account block is enabled by default. Username security. I could argue this is security through obscurity again, but it's useful anyway. Your password and two-factor authentication are there to protect you from brute force attacks, not your username. But brute force attacks against common usernames can have the unfortunate side effect of locking those accounts out even if they remain secure. Fair recommendation, but for the wrong reason. Disable FTP? Yes. Change the SFTP port? No. Changing ports is not the answer. Telnet is the same. Disable it, but stop with the ports. Guest account is disabled out of the box. Iframes are blocked. These are all good. TOS version? Yes. Updated software is good for security. UPnP discovery service? UPnP, Universal Plug and Play, is not a single thing, but a set of protocols that can be used for different things. This is flagging discovery as a security weakness. This is so other devices can find it easily, but turning it off won't hide the NAS. In fact, the NAS uses multiple discovery protocols besides UPnP. What's the point of disabling UPnP discovery while allowing WSDD or Bonjour discovery? TerraMaster's media server app uses DLNA. DLNA uses UPnP for discovery. If you enable the media server, it's going to broadcast UPnP discovery messages anyway, even if you have the setting turned off. I suspect someone got it confused with UPnP IGD, a protocol used to configure your router. This allows devices on your network to request that your router allow traffic through its firewall directly to them. UPnP IGD is a security risk, and if you're sufficiently tech savvy, you may want to go disable it on your router, but it's nothing to do with UPnP discovery on your NAS. One thing I'm surprised not to see here is multi-factor authentication. MFA is a must if you're planning to use this over the internet. TerraMaster supports it, you just have to go looking for it in the user settings. I would be a bit more forceful about prompting people to set this up. Other settings in the security section, CSP headers are enabled by default. Good. A lot of vendors neglect that, so well done TerraMaster. You can configure a firewall and there's denial of service protection enabled by default. One thing I said I'd show you was the Hyperlock worm. Crazy name, it's basically limited immutability. If you tick this box, then any file saved to this volume will become immutable, meaning it cannot be changed, for the number of days you specify. This sort of thing can be very useful to protect your backups from ransomware. Ransomware gangs know that the best way to fight back is by keeping backups, so a lot of modern ransomware will seek out and destroy the backups before blackmailing you. If your backups are immutable, they can't be destroyed, even by an administrator, within reason. If I create a file in this volume, then attempt to delete it, no, not allowed. If I try to delete the folder, no. The volume, no. If I go to the terminal and try to delete it from there, no. Even if I elevate to root, no. That said, if someone does get admin on your terminal, you're screwed, because they can use LVM to unmount and delete the underlying logical volume. It's not really supposed to protect against local access. The idea is that if you're only exposing file sharing protocols to the network, you can't get around this. Once someone has local access, all bets are off. It's a good feature though, and you could certainly work this into a backup strategy. Just be aware that once the immutability period expires, modifying the file will not make it immutable again. It only seems to be triggered at the initial creation, which feels like possibly a flaw. The last part of the security review is a vulnerability scan. I'm using NAS for this, which is basically the industry standard. To set expectations, there will be vulnerabilities. Everything has vulnerabilities. The questions to ask are how serious are they, and how long have they been left unresolved. In the UK, we have a security standard called Cyber Essentials. It's a basic standard that a lot of organisations adhere to. If you work in the public sector, for example, it's mandatory. Cyber Essentials dictates that all software must be under active security support, and any vulnerabilities categorised as high or critical must be patched within 14 days of a fix becoming available. So I believe that's an expectation that is reasonable to have. Let's work through the findings rated medium and above. SMB signing prevents file transfers being modified in transit. On a home network, I wouldn't be too concerned about this. On a business network, you should probably enforce this, but TerraMaster doesn't appear to have an option to do so. SSL certificate issues are expected. TerraMaster can't ship the device with a publicly trusted certificate for your personal domain because they don't own your personal domain. The question here is, do they give you the option to add your own? And yes, they do, so this is fine. The next couple are jQuery vulnerabilities. This is a third-party library used in the construction of TerraMaster's web interface. It is likely these would be very difficult to actually exploit in a meaningful way, but the concerning thing for me is that a device that has just been launched relies on a 13-year-old version of jQuery. That has not been supported for a long time. This OpenSSL vulnerability is quite a new one. It's marked as high severity because it could allow remote code execution. But Ubuntu has rated it as a medium priority because it's unlikely someone would actually be able to trigger it. Ubuntu's fix was released just over a month ago as I record, so it hasn't met the Cyber Essentials timeframe. It has been hanging around a little too long, but not ages. The last two are for the OpenSSH server. This is disabled by default and therefore not exploitable in the device's initial state. However, SSH is something a lot of people are going to enable for monitoring, administration, and automation, and it's supposed to be secure. That's literally what the first S stands for. This one weakens SSH but doesn't completely break its security. This one is a problem. According to Ubuntu, a remote attacker could use this issue to bypass authentication and remotely access systems without proper credentials. Ubuntu released the fix over a year ago, so I am disappointed to find this unpatched in a system that just launched. Instead of advising people to change their SSH port, TerraMaster should concentrate on not shipping SSH versions with known vulnerabilities. Overall, while this is far from the worst set of scan results I've seen, there is some cause for concern, and I would think twice before exposing this device to the internet as is. What's interesting is that because TOS is based in Ubuntu, you can see software in the standard Ubuntu repos. I asked TerraMaster, hey, I see you've enabled the regular Ubuntu repositories, is it okay to go and install software from those? They said yes. The command line says, this might break things. I take this to mean TerraMaster won't restrict you from customizing your device, but you're on your own if you break it. Unfortunately, the one package I really want to install, it won't let me. I guess TerraMaster did put some safeguards in place to stop me breaking it by accident. I do appreciate them not locking the device down completely though. If there's an extra tool I want to install, I'm able to do so. In fact, TerraMaster's acceptance of customization goes well beyond that. It is entirely possible and entirely supported to install a completely different operating system on this device. Obviously, TerraMaster won't support the software, but they will continue to honour the hardware warranty if you choose to do this. To do so, plug in a mouse and keyboard and make use of that HDMI port you've been wondering about. Hold F12 when the device starts up and you'll get a boot menu. Before jumping into your chosen installer, take a visit to the BIOS and disable this setting. Otherwise, the NAS will just try to reinstall TOS when you reboot. Depending on your operating system, you may also wish to enable Secure Boot while you're here. Now you can install your favourite operating system like it was any other computer. Linux worked fine. Windows worked fine. TrueNAS worked fine. Proxmox worked fine. VMware ESX? Nope. But did we really expect it to? VMware traditionally doesn't play nicely with Realtek network interfaces, and that's what we've got here. The ability to install a different operating system is something I consider to be very important. At the end of the day, it's a computer, it's your computer, and you should be able to do what you want with it. If you like the hardware but not the software, install your own. If you do like the software but TerraMaster for some reason ends support, you're not left with a useless brick because you can still install your own software. There's no walled garden here, TerraMaster is fully supportive of this. Gold star for that. Now we come to the big question. Does the TerraMaster F4-425 Plus get a recommendation from me? This is going to depend on how you intend to use it. If you intend to buy it for the hardware, wipe it and install your own operating system, then assuming it has the specs you need, it mostly comes down to value. Is the hardware itself a good deal? If you compare it against similar devices in the home NAS market, yes. It's similar value to Ugreen, it's better value than Synology, but that's somewhat irrelevant because Synology doesn't want you to install your own operating system anyway. If you compare it to assembling your own, then if you have existing hardware you plan to reuse, or you don't care what the end result looks like, you can probably slap something together fairly cheaply. For a fair comparison though, you should price up hardware that supports 4 SATA drives and 3 NVMe drives with dual 5GB network interfaces. It needs to fit into a very small package, mini ITX at most, and the case needs to have 4 hot swappable drive bays. I think you're going to struggle to build something as tidy as this for significantly cheaper, especially with that dual 5GB. That was not easy to find matches for with a similar CPU, and moving up to a higher powered CPU blew the budget. So hardware alone, you could do a lot worse. If you like the look and spec, go for it. I'll include links in the video description if you'd like to purchase one. I have it in good authority that TerraMaster will be doing some deals for Black Friday. Now, if you're after a turnkey solution that just works out of the box, we have to consider the TOS operating system, and that's where things come unstuck. Feature-wise, it's not perfect, but it covers the standard uses for a NAS. For a budget option, it's actually pretty decent. Unfortunately, I can't recommend this if you're not planning to install your own operating system because I don't think TerraMaster has done a good enough job with the security. It's a shame because there are genuinely good features like immutable volume, security isolation and SPC, but it fails on the basics of vulnerability management and the software supply chain. I have flagged my findings to TerraMaster and they say the OpenSSL vulnerability will be addressed by TOS 7 next year. But what about the rest? And what are we supposed to do with TOS 6 in the meantime? On a NAS, I rate security to be more important than performance or features, because the whole purpose of the device is to protect your precious memories and information. I can't test everything, so what I'm looking for is evidence of a security-first mindset. When your latest and greatest software relies on 13-year-old libraries with known vulnerabilities, that does not give me confidence. It raises questions about accumulation of technical debt within the system. High-severity vulnerabilities going unpatched is not good, especially ones that include words like unauthenticated remote code execution. TerraMaster can turn this around, but it has to be more than just a simple patch. When a vulnerability is discovered in a third-party dependency, TerraMaster needs to be able to feed that fix into their pipeline and spit out a TOS update to address the problem. Waiting until the next major release doesn't cut it. The timeline needs to be days, and I suspect that will require a fundamental change to the way they build software. I hope they come back swinging. In the meantime, you should swing your way over to here and check out this video next.